Welcome back, everyone interested in teaching ESL. This is the third part of a four-part discussion of integrated and discrete skills, ESL courses, and about the perfect integrated skills subject for higher levels, cross-cultural psychology. I ended part two by saying you might ask, what is so special about cross-cultural psychology that makes it a good subject for an integrated skills course? How is it different from some other subject areas like climate change or history or current events or the environment? Today, I'll answer those two questions by explaining all the factors that make cross-cultural psychology the best for higher level ESL integrated courses. As I mentioned in part one, for us ESL teachers, our primary job is teaching language skills. So let's first look at skills that we are trying to develop in higher or advanced levels. We can do this by doing a kind of needs analysis to figure out what language skills will our advanced level students need to have after they leave our ESL classes. I should clarify that I'll mostly be focusing on academic ESL for students whose goals are to take college classes and perhaps get a degree in an English-speaking country. There might be some overlap in goals with students in an ESP, English for special purposes courses. For example, students studying in a specific field like the medical professions or IT or business or tourism. So in our advanced academic ESL classes, we'd like to mirror what students will experience in mainstream non-ESL courses. This means that students will need to be able to read academic style texts, write academic type papers, and discuss the subject in small groups. Here is why I have found cross-cultural psychology to be the most effective at accomplishing these goals. First, from the very start, what students learn is new and surprising, but not overwhelming. Because all our students have already had cross-cultural experiences and or at least heard or read about them, we don't need to spend a lot of time introducing this field by giving background information and teaching many new concepts for the first classes. From day one, they will be able to relate to the content and see how it can apply to their personal lives. I'll give you a brief example to illustrate how quickly students will be able to relate to the content of cross-cultural psychology. There was a study of 4-year-old children. First, they conducted this with American children. Here's what the researchers did. They started with a pair of children at a table in a playroom, and they gave one of them a plate with 10 pieces of their favorite food, for example, cookies or some candy. This child was labeled the sharer. The other child, labeled the receiver, was given only one piece of food on a plate. Then the experimenter said she had to leave the room for a couple of minutes, but would return soon, and told these two children that they could start to eat now. While the experimenter was gone, they videotaped the kids for 5 minutes. The researchers wanted to see if the sharer with the 10 pieces would give some to the receiver who had only one piece. If the sharer gave some without being asked, it was considered spontaneous sharing. But if the sharer only gave some if the receiver asked for some of his or her favorite food, it was called elicited sharing. For example, by saying, "You have more than me, give me some," or "I won't be your friend if you won't give me some." For these American children, the majority of the time, the sharer wouldn't give any food unless the sharer requested it. In other words, elicited sharing. It was rare for these American 4-year-olds to spontaneously share with the other child. And often they would refuse to share even when the other child asked them to. Then some researchers replicated the study, but this time with 4-year-old children from 2 Asian countries. In contrast to the American children, these Asian children shared more frequently, including more spontaneously. Also, unlike the American children who often refused to share when the other child asked them to, these Asian children never refused to share when the other child requested some. The point of this study isn't to show that Asian children are superior to American children. It's to demonstrate different norms. And there are good reasons for these norms and for why each child behaved as they did. This short study illustrates so many aspects about the appeal of using cross-cultural psychology in an ESL course. First, students are immediately immersed in common academic language. For example, researchers found and they replicated the study, but in a context that students can easily imagine. Also, they don't need to have a background in any content-specific vocabulary to understand the study. The one term that might be new to them is the word norm, which can mean normal, and is a very common term not only in psychology, but also other areas, like giving a tip to a waiter or giving thumbs up to show approval are some examples of cultural norms. So, when we say that this behavior is the norm for these children's culture, students can understand it, and in this case, they are usually amazed by it. The idea that these children who are only 4 years old have already adopted this norm for sharing or not sharing is very intriguing. The information is new and surprising, but not overwhelming. Our ESL students are able to develop their confidence that they can actually read and understand academic style writing. There are some advanced level vocabulary like spontaneous or elicited, but these are not specific terms to cross-cultural psychology. They'll see these in many different contexts. And because they can so easily relate to the content, they can immediately engage in small group and even whole class discussions about it. They can effortlessly orally summarize the studies. They'll enjoy sharing their own experiences with the norms of sharing with others, either as children or in their present life, and they'll want to hear others tell their experiences. They naturally draw on discussion techniques which they've practiced in the past. For example, responding to a classmate's comment, or volunteering an answer, or summarizing what someone else had said, or answering in details. In other words, they will want to discuss this content and in the process develop confidence that they can be an active member of a discussion group participating in a college class with their English-speaking classmates and teachers. Now, let's look at academic writing skills development. What writing skills will our students need to be successful writers of academic papers when they take mainstream college courses, in other words, non-ESL courses? No doubt, they will need to be able to paraphrase and summarize. You know, a problem that many ESL students have when referring to source information in a paper is the tendency to copy parts of texts instead of using their own words and style. So, when first developing paraphrasing skills, we want to make it possible for them to experience early success. And again, cross-cultural psychology does that. Because of the nature of the content being easily relatable to them, They can paraphrase and summarize without having to constantly look at the text, and thus aren't tempted to just copy. Take the example of the studies of the 4-year-olds sharing food. They can easily internalize the details of the studies when they read them. Then they orally summarize the studies and exchange experiences in their discussion groups. At this point, writing about the studies in their own words comes naturally, and they don't need to look back at the text and be tempted to copy it. Since the content is so well known to them, they can focus on developing an academic writing style using expressions like according to the study, according to the researchers, and from the research we learned. Because they've had productive discussions, it will be easy for them to paraphrase and summarize the study when they write their opinions with support from the source. They'll be able to write what they have found significant or important. And because of all these points, they'll be able to more easily learn how to synthesize 2 sources or 3 sources or more in one paper, again, using their own words. Now let's look beyond the classroom and beyond academic settings for why cross-cultural psychology is such a great subject for ESL students. I mentioned in part 2 how students have found this so helpful in understanding people from other countries and their own country, and even has been life-changing for some. Also in part 2, I told about an international student who was confused when his American roommate told him not to take anything from his shelf in their shared refrigerator. Now, remember the study about the 4-year-olds sharing food. After reading that study, and even more the subsequent passages that we studied about why Asians and Americans have different norms for sharing, he told me that he now understood why his roommate didn't want to share the food in the refrigerator. He said that he didn't think negatively about his roommate. He realized that the norm of his roommate's culture and his culture were different, and that his roommate had a good reason for his request not to take. And I've heard that type of response to this subject so often from my students. In closing this part, I just want to mention a side benefit to teaching cross-cultural psychology in our ESL classes. It is really fun for the teachers. We are constantly learning something new from our students and about their personal experiences when we listen to their small group discussions and read their papers. Needless to say, most of us did not major in cross-cultural psychology and aren't expected to be experts in the field. But we can still feel comfortable using cross-cultural psychology as the basis for helping ESL students develop their language skills. And language skill building is what we are trained to do. In part 4, the final video of this series, I'll share with you some cross-cultural psychology materials that you can download for free and use with your students. See you next time.